somebody had offered me, you know, an opiate when I was about 17 years old, just like they had offered me, you know, a blunt of marijuana. And I readily took it because I didn't know that there was such significant difference between the two things, you know, and what it would do to my body and what I would do for it. I didn't know that it would lead me down the roads that I had been on. You know, and then they took those off of the shelves, and I was left
Opiates?
Yes. Okay. And well, specifically, oh my goodness, Oxycontin.
Okay.
And when they did that, I was left to my own devices. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know the way that I was feeling was withdrawals, because I didn't know about addiction.
What did the withdrawal feel like?
Like the flu. It felt like the flu. I had cold shivers, and I was sweaty, and I had a stomach ache, and usually a headache, and I was super anxious the whole time, and I just was very uncomfortable in my own skin. And I thought it was like coming down with something. I really did. And then it was brought to my attention by the person that offered me heroin after we were no longer able to find Oxycontin on the street, that I was going through withdrawals and that the heroin would make it better, and it was a lot cheaper and it would last a lot longer, and I would get exactly what I wanted from it. And I denied that the first time.
Did you know what heroin was? Is that why you denied it?
Yeah, I mean, I knew that there was drugs, and I knew that they were bad, you know, but the things that like were talked to me about were, you know, heroin and cocaine and, you know, things that you thought were just things that you heard about. You know, you never saw it, you just heard about it, and they were bad, and you weren't supposed to do those. You know, nobody told us about, or nobody told me specifically about prescription medication, and that's something that a doctor prescribed would end up leading me down a road that I did not ever intend to be on, and would have a very hard time getting off of it, you know. So I knew that heroin was bad. And that first time I denied it, you know, I didn't accept it. And then when it was offered to me again, I did. I just felt really awful. And I was given this promise that came along with this little bag of heroin that it would make it so that I felt better. And I was willing to do whatever it took at that point. And I took that, and I was like, wow, this is great. Like, I can still function. Nobody knows. I'll just sniff it every now and then. I'll be totally fine, and I'll just feel really good all day, every day. You know, and the bag was like $5 in comparison to the $100 that I was spending on a pill. And, you know, little did I know that that $5 bag was never going to be enough for me. You know, I thought that I could just do this, spend a couple $5 a day and be okay, but it never was enough for me.
Was it a different high?
Yeah, it's similar and different at the same time. It's it doesn't last quite as long, but it's very, very strong. It's much stronger than an Oxycontin is. But it's very short-lived. And once you don't feel it anymore, you want to feel it again. You know, it just feels, it makes you feel like you can pretty much do whatever it is that you could ever want to do and completely function, and it just makes you feel good, and it kind of numbs you at the same time, so you don't really feel emotionally either. Whether it be good or bad in your life, you know, you just don't feel. So I did that for a really long time, and I was sniffing the heroin, and you know, the couple $5 bills a day turned into hundreds of dollars a day. And then that's when I was introduced to the needle. And somebody had said, if you put it in a needle, you can get the high that you had before when you first started. And that promise to me, yet again, was like, okay, you know, like I'm starting to feel like crap because I'm running out of money, I'm running out of things to sell, I'm running out of things to do in order to be able to get what I need to feel better, you know, because I was going through withdrawals all the time. Every day I would wake up with withdrawals, and I needed to be able to not feel those. So I was given the promise that if I just put it in a needle and shot it up, I would feel like I did the very first time that I took it. And that promise to me was like, okay, wow, this is awesome. This is what I'm going to do. And I did it. And then I didn't put it down, you know, and I ran with that for a very long time. And that is something that took me to bottoms that, like, I always thought, like, I would never get to. Because eventually I built up a tolerance to that as well, you know, and it never was enough. I could have all that I thought that I needed, and it still wasn't enough for me. And I would continue to use, and I would continue to ruin my life and everybody else's life. And, you know, I overdosed at one point.
What was that situation like?
That was very confusing for me and my whole family. At this time, I knew that something was wrong, but I didn't know to the extent that it was. So I thought that anybody who picked up drugs like I did would also have the same outcome as me. So people would understand where I was in my life and how I got there, which wasn't the case. So when I overdosed, everybody in my family found out in that day, you know.
So they didn't know before?
No one knew. I was high functioning. I was able to hide it decently well, you know. Some people knew something was going on, but I had also smoked weed prior to this, so I thought they probably thought that it was, you know, something like that, you know, but they didn't really know. They didn't know. I don't think they had any education on, you know, what heroin was doing to people, how easily accessible it was to people, you know, and that, like, someone, you know, like me, like their daughter, could do something like that. So I overdosed. I ended up having renal failure because my muscles started to break down and the proteins in the muscles overloaded my kidneys. I had paralysis on the left side of my body for, you know, at least I think 48 hours, and then I just couldn't feel anything. I could move it eventually, but you know, and my experience in the hospital was I was treated like what I felt, essentially. I felt worthless, and I felt like this was my fate. I felt awful about myself, and that I was undeserving of anything good. And but that's also how I was treated when I went into the hospital. And I think that you know, had there been one person that just, like, looked at me and showed a little bit of compassion, I think it would have went a long way. But instead, every day that I was there, which was like 5 or 6 days, I was treated with such disrespect. Even the EMTs on the way to the hospital when I overdosed were awful to me. And, you know, it's very, very sad to think that other people are going through that right now as we speak, you know. So I was handed a pamphlet and told that I could go to IOP, which is intensive outpatient program. That's, you know, somewhat successful, I guess. You go there and you're educated on addiction, and you meet other people like you, not.
So did you go?
I did go. I didn't find it very beneficial, and I don't know if it's because of this mindset that I was in at the time, or if it was just because, you know, a lot of people are mandated to do IOP. So I think that a lot of the people that go are there for the wrong reasons, which you get a bunch of people who don't really know much about anything, who are all there for the wrong reasons. You kind of come out like the outcome isn't the greatest.
Right.
So I went to that failed, and then I was, you know, sober, and then I wasn't, and I was sober and I wasn't, and then I finally went to a fellowship that I was introduced to a fellowship. Like there's Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was introduced to one of those, and somebody told my story. They stood up there and they told my story, and I was like, oh my gosh, like this person is just like me, and they're sober. This doesn't make any sense, you know. I couldn't fathom putting a couple of hours together, let alone a couple of years or a couple of decades like some of the people in the room had. And every person reached out to me in that room that day and shook my hand, and all the women at least, and was like, hey, here's my number if you need rides to meetings, or if you want to just link up, or just chit chat and you need to pick up the phone and talk to somebody, like, I'm here for you. And I think that's the first time that I felt like a person. And I just like breathed in a sigh of relief, and I was like, oh my gosh, like they see me, you know, like I'm not just the addict that people look at me and see right now, you know, like I'm a person to them. And I felt for the first time in a really long time like I belonged somewhere. And you know, I didn't stay sober, unfortunately. I would be able to get like a few months together, and then I would go back out and I would use, and I would think that like for some reason that if I were able to stay away from drugs and alcohol for an X amount of time, that I would be able to go back and be okay if I drank, or if I, you know, just did, you know, X, Y, and Z instead of A, B, and C, and, you know, or maybe smaller amounts of these things, and less of this and more of this, or whatever it might be. And I tried everything that I could possibly do to be able to keep, you know, drinking socially or smoking weed or whatever it might be. I tried all avenues, and like none of them worked. And finally I was at a point in my life where I had just a duffel bag full of clothes and nothing else. I had no family. I didn't have a phone that worked. I didn't have a place to stay. I was completely homeless. I was, you know, hopping from place to place every now and then to whoever was willing to open their doors to me, which was not at all a lot of people, and those people weren't great people either. They were doing the same thing as I was. And
Did they ask for something in return?
Drugs, I think. Sharing drugs. You know, I always had to give a piece of whatever I had in order to stay where I was. So I was in front of Providence Hospital, and I was standing outside, and I had a choice of whether or not I was going to go and manipulate somebody for money, or if I was going to walk inside. And I looked at my duffel bag full of dirty clothes, and like I think I cried for the first time in a really long time, because drugs numb you completely. And I cried, and I picked up my stuff and I walked in, and I begged them to give me a bed. I said, listen, I really need help. This isn't who I am, this isn't who I want to be, and I need to get in there. And they made me wait about 12 hours, but I sat in that waiting room, and I saw people come in and out. I saw people giving me weird looks. I'd been waiting there for so long. And then there was like a couple people that would trickle in, and they were going to the same place that I was, and I could tell, you know. And I sat there and I waited, and then I went upstairs and I began my journey, and I went from there to and like a holding, essentially, which is like a 30-day holding till you get into a halfway house or wherever you're going. I went there, and then I went to a halfway house. From a halfway house, I went to a sober living, and I took a year out of my life because I knew, like, if I didn't take the time that was suggested to me, which it was a year that was suggested that I take out of my life to get myself better, that I would spend another 8+ years doing exactly what I had done before. So I knew that a year out of my life was so minuscule in the grand scheme of things, and I knew I could do it. So I did, and I stayed in a program for a year, and then I started my life. You know, I got my own place. I got my son in my life every day. I went back to school. I met a great man who was also in the program, named Mark. I don't know if that's want to throw that in here. He'll feel really good. You know, and we live today, and I never did that before.
What does living mean to you? What are you doing now? Where are you? What is your happiness now?
My happiness is being able to show up for all of my son's soccer games or hockey games or baseball games or whatever, you know, whatever sport he's playing for that season, and showing up for every parent conference that there is, and being able to pick him up when he doesn't feel well at school, like being his mom, you know, like that's happiness to me. And being able to show up for my friends and my family when they need me, or when they ask me if I can help out, you know, with something. And like just yesterday, my dad had texted me and my sister and was like, hey, can you guys come over and help paint the basement? You know, we got a lot going on. And I was able to show up for that. And that feels so amazing to me, you know, because like there were so many times that my father would come and move me from house to house because I'd either get kicked out, you know, or I lost the place that I was in, or, you know, I was just, it was awful. And I like get to give back, not by just talking about it, but I get to give back in my actions. And I don't just exist anymore. I'm not just here and taking from this world, you know, like I'm able to contribute to it. And I'm in school, and that's like the most beautiful thing I've ever like been able to get back and do, you know. And I bust my butt, and it's hard work, but it feels so amazing. You know, I never wanted to be the person that I had become when I was using. Like I didn't wake up one day and was like, I'm gonna be a drug addict starting now, and I'm gonna ruin everyone's life. You know, I wasn't educated on what I was getting myself into, and I don't blame that fully on what happened. You know, like I knew drugs in general were bad, and I knew that it was a form of a drug because, you know, we were sneaking around doing it. So I knew that it was wrong, and I chose to do it anyway. But I think that like had I known what I do now about where it takes people and what it does to the person and to everyone that loves them, to the people that love them, like I think I definitely would have thought twice about what I was getting myself into.